there are quite a few people coming in. So I just encourage you to just do a little bit of reflection while we're waiting, to think about something that's helped you to get your writing done or to write effectively. And I've put some prompts there, but they're just prompts. So just any tip that you would like to share with the community around writing. All right, everybody. Well, we are working on trying to stop the beeping, and I'm sorry about that. um, that is because we have a record number of people coming on board today. I believe 950 women enrolled, registered for today. We won't get that many, but it's still a terrific number. So thank you so much for coming on board. And I'm just asking everyone just to take a minute or so to reflect on something that helps you to get your writing done. Actually, I think the number of people that registered for this topic is really testament to the challenge that writing can be for people. And so it's really great that you've come on board. I'm going to just slowly kick off and begin our session. So first of all, obviously, these days you don't need to tell anyone, please mute because everyone knows. But I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land today of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And please do feel free to share in the chat whose land you are on today. So we will have our usual format. I will talk for me a little bit, and I will talk a little bit about some of the research. There's not a lot that I could find, some of my own thoughts. And then we're really grateful to have today two ARC Laureate Fellows, Professor Jane McAdam and Lidia Morawska. And I knew I was going to struggle. Sorry, Lidia. Just remember, you're welcome to put questions in the chat, but also use Slido. And Lucinda, you will meet later on. She'll be sharing some of the questions with the panel. And thank you, guys, those of you who are sharing whose land you're on today. Okay, so let's get into the topic. And I'm going to begin with a confession. And here's my confession. I confess that I am going to do the exact same content that I did when we did this topic in 2020. And why is this? Well, I had these wonderful intentions of, doing something different so that we would have, a different slant on what I gave last time. But I think I had two deadlines last night plus this, and I just thought, no, I'm going to just do what we did before. So we did one in 2020, and to be honest, I couldn't remember what I'd said, and I gave it. So I figured that even if you happen to be here again and having watched it before, you've probably forgotten as well. So and the reason I think this is role modeling, right, is we talk a lot on this series around how do we cope with our workloads, right? We have ridiculous workloads, and, sometimes you have to satisfy us rather than be perfect. And it was really my perfectionism streak that was kicking in last night, saying, no, you have to do something different. What if it's the same viewers? And then I was like, well, really, honestly, they're probably not going to mind at all. And so I thought I should role model that it's okay to satisfy on occasion. And I hope that doesn't detract from the quality of today's session. So I think I want to really give a quite psychological perspective on this topic. I am a psychologist, and I think it was probably in my PhD we had a little session on writing in where I was doing my PhD, and I thought it was weird. It was like because everyone was talking about the psychology of it, and I was like, oh, I thought this was going to be helping me to learn to write. And but it really hit me that at that point that writing is a very psychological process. And so let's delve a little bit into some of that. You know, we've talked on this series before about imposter series and worry about ability. That kicks into play with writing because we're actually putting tangible things down onto paper that other people can see. Our perfectionism, our inner critic, this can be the time that flares up. And we can also have these sort of unhelpful beliefs, that I can't write, or I must write something perfect each time or whatever, and these are not helpful beliefs. And they lead to us doing things like, well, the main thing is just not writing. So procrastinating, or actually creating time for writing and then just going on social media, or just being really, really slow in our writing. So let's unpack some of those a little bit more. I'm going to talk about procrastination. I'm going to talk about why social processes can actually help, and I'll briefly touch on learning mindset. So there's this very cool definition of procrastination that I quite like: the act of needlessly delaying tasks to the point of experiencing subjective discomfort. So next time someone says, "Are you procrastinating?" you say, "No, no, no, I'm needlessly delaying tasks to the point of experiencing subjective discomfort." So we're basically putting things off, but it's sort of painful. There's actually some research that if you are someone who procrastinates, it predicts your anxiety about writing, delays in writing, lower writing satisfaction, and if you're a student, it predicts lower grades. So you can see there I've put up a meta-analysis showing that the more that you procrastinate, the lower your academic performance. And you can see there's some other citations there. So procrastination is an important phenomenon that we need to think about when it comes to writing. So how could procrastination play out? Well, number one, I don't have time to write. I mean, how many times have we all said that? I've probably say it 3 or 4 times a day, but well, that's exaggerating. But what that really means is I haven't allocated time to write. And so this is the importance of building writing time in. We're going to talk more about that. Some of these ideas come from the book that I've shared there, How to Write a Lot, by Paul Sylvia, which I just downloaded off the internet, and it had some really good tips. So if you want to delve a bit more deeply into the topic, you might find that book useful. So some of the tips that come from that book and from our own experience is, try to schedule the time. We've done a session here on time management and this matrix of important and urgent, and how we always get sucked into these urgent but not important tasks, which tend to be email. And what we really need to do is schedule those tasks that are important but not urgent. And writing often fits into that category, because unless you've got a revision deadline, you often don't have a deadline. So it doesn't have the urgency, but it's still important. So that's why we've got to schedule it. And this book suggests 4 hours a week, but it's really up to you and where you're at in your stage. Creating a habit is really important. And I've shared this strategy with many people many times, and I'll share it again. When I was the director of a research centre in the UK and really struggling to find time to write, I also had 3 children under 6 at the time. And what saved me actually was I read a book very similar to this one that said this thing about create a habit. And so I started going across to Starbucks, which was just opposite our building where I was working. and just spending an hour every day writing before the start of the day, as much as was feasible. And that was probably a savior, really, of my own personal productivity at a time when I was trying to do organizational change and raise the kids and all that stuff. So creating a habit, one of the things, this series is called Small Wins. It's all about the importance of habits and things like that, because what happens when you create a habit is you take away the self-regulatory effort required to motivate yourself. So, I often use the example of exercise. I'm not an exercise fan. Those of you who know me know that. So the only way I can really embed it into my life is to actually book it in so that it is a habit, so that I have no choice. I do not waste mental effort going, oh, am I going to exercise today? It's locked in. And it's the same with writing. You don't want to, if you're spending a lot of time, oh, am I going to write today? Am I not going to write? You're wasting mental effort. So lock it in, create your habit. Many times when I share this strategy, people are like, but I need a day to write. And I watched my little Women in Research from 2020 last night to remind myself what I said. And I shared a story of a colleague, and I remember this colleague at UWA, and she probably knows who she is if she's watching, who said to me, no, Sharon, I can't do it like that. I need a day to, and then I said, give it a try. So we all did this thing where we all tried an hour a day. And she came to me after 2 weeks. She said, no, you're right. I can do it. So even if you think you need that time. And the reason I say that is if you're a PhD student, you might be able to find a day but the more that you accelerate in your career or go up, the more demands you get, the more this idea of getting a day becomes impossible. Choose a good time, biologically realistic. What that just means is choose a time that fits with you. If you're a morning person, write in the morning. If you're an evening person, write in the evening. But choose a time that's good for your brain and your body. And try and do it in the same place. This is this idea of stimulus control, where if you, or like when I always sat down at Starbucks, I knew that that's what I was there, and all the stimulus is sort of activating me to do that. And again, just makes it easier to do it. So I like this comment by Stephen King, and if you don't know, he's a sort of horror writer. It says, if you want to be a writer, you must do two things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. So I think that's actually pretty good advice for academics as well. Another procrastination strategy is I need to do some more analyses first, or I need to read some more papers, or I need to develop some ideas. So we've got all these excuses. And, this can be part of that sort of perfectionist idea that, I'm not ready yet. The argument would still be just right. It comes down to habit. So do that. Get that habit in place. Set goals. There's a huge amount of research on the power of setting goals. And they shouldn't just be, I'm going to write for an hour, because that's what we would call a very vague goal. Set a specific goal. Write at least 200 words, or write the first 3 paragraphs, or write an outline for my next paper. So you know what it is that you're trying to achieve, and, track your progress. If you really are someone who's struggling, track whether you've written that number of words and so on. Write imperfect first drafts. I think there's also this thing where we want to write perfectly. I don't know if you guys ever have this, but sometimes I have the most beautiful first paragraph in the world, because I've rewritten it and rewritten it and rewritten it, but I've not progressed beyond the first paragraph. So I think you might even have a little rule for yourself, and I've had to do this at times. You are not allowed to go backwards. So you are never allowed to go back and fix things. You've got to keep going forward. So part of this really is understanding your own psychology and what are your particular issues, the perfect first paragraph or not doing it in the first, and then solving for those issues. Add a contingency. What I used to do in Starbucks was I would say, I have to write 500 words before I have a coffee, which was really good because you're sitting in a coffee shop and you haven't bought any coffee. You feel really compelled to quickly, do what you need to do before you buy the coffee. It could be something else. It could be, oh, I won't have a shower or something until I've done it, whatever. I need a new computer is another version of the same excuse. I need to wrap other stuff up first. I need to clear the decks. These are all good procrastination strategies. Oh, and here's a big one. I'm waiting until I feel like it, or I'm waiting until I'm inspired. And I love this study by Boyce in 1990. So he got college professors and then randomly assigned them to these 3 conditions that you can see. So one was don't write, only write if it's an emergency. That was condition 1. Some were randomly assigned to this spontaneous condition. So there were 50 scheduled sessions, but it said to people, just write, when you feel inspired in those sessions. And then there was a contingency condition where there were these same 50 sessions, but people had to write and they had to donate to a charity. And in fact, it had to be a charity they didn't really like if they didn't write. So it was like forced writing. Well, in condition C, forced writing, people wrote 3.5 times as much as they did in B and 16 times as much as they did in A. Not only that, is people were reporting more creativity. So in the C condition, there was just 1 day between the creative ideas that they had versus 2 days and 5 days in the other conditions. So there's some gold in that study that don't wait to feel like the time is right. Just get on with it. And so this quote also, I only write when I'm inspired. So I see to it that I'm inspired every morning at 9 o'clock. That's what we need to be doing. Another thing, as well as thinking about, your sort of motivation and procrastination, to think about is the power of writing together. And there is, again, research evidence that when people write together, they have better outcomes. There's different sorts of writing groups that you can have. Some of them can be more goal accountability groups where you might say, all right, let's set some goals. I want to write, the first half of my introductory chapter or something. And then the next time you come together, you would say whether you'd met the goals and you'd set new goals. And so the focus is not so much on actually writing, but on just coming together and sharing progress and being accountable, I guess, for each other. There are also writing groups where people come together and write. And we've had here in Curtin these shut up and write sessions. We also sometimes will have writing boot camps where even just for a day, everyone will go. We used to have them for 2 or 3 days. Sometimes we just have them for a day. But invariably, we go around the circle at the end and we ask for feedback on the day. And everybody talks about how powerful it is that every time they felt like slacking off, they look up and they look around and they see other people writing and they think, oh, they're all still going, so I better keep going. And so there's this sort of protection against loafing, I guess, because you see other people working hard and that motivates you. And you can also, of course, have a writing group where you give each other feedback. So, you could read each other's chapters and so on. So different types of writing groups, and it's really about thinking what's the best fit for our purpose. This is actually some research that shows if you're a procrastinator, but so you're really procrastinating with your writing, that this feedback is particularly important, because what you can see here in this study, and the dependent variable was writing a lot and writing early and these sorts of components. But if you're not a procrastinator, that's the green, you're fine. You're writing early, you're doing all the things. If you're a procrastinator, so that's the red, but you get feedback. And I think there's the accountability component there and the feedback and that social process, then you're actually fine. It's if you're sort of a procrastinator and you're not getting feedback and you're on your own, it can be quite challenging. So the final thing that I'll talk about is that writing is a craft. It can be learned. And I guess, one of the things that people use to procrastinate is this sort of, I'm not very good at writing, or I can't write, or whatever. And there's a lot of psychology around having this fixed, it's called a fixed ability mindset, where you think either you can write or you can't. And connected to that, similar to that, is this thing called a performance goal orientation, where you're really focused on, when you're doing something like writing, you're really focused on how people are going to evaluate it rather than your learning. So you might be thinking, oh, if my writing's not good, my supervisors are not going to think I'm smart. You know, that's a common one, right? That we hear from our students, or maybe they don't say it, but you sort of know that might be what is going on. So those sort of ways of thinking that writing is you can or you can't, or and if you've got that mindset, then if you feel like your writing's not very good, that's even worse, because you think it's an ability thing. If you can reframe and you can think about writing as something that can be learned, it's a craft. I think the craft concept is really relevant here. And there's a lot of guidance, and I think you'll hear some a little bit later from Lidia around learning this craft of writing. And there's no substitute, really. It's something that you learn, and it takes time. So last quote, I went for years not finishing anything because, of course, when you finish something, you can be judged. That's a sort of classic performance goal mindset, that you're focused just on performance and judgment. You're not focused on the learning and the process and those sorts of things. So that's another factor to think about. And you may have some unhelpful thoughts, and we've talked about this also in other sessions. But, you know, if you're having those inner critic comments to yourself, you know, just imagine if a friend was saying that to you, and say back to your mind what you would say to your friend if they were saying, oh, I'm useless at writing. What would you say to your friend if they said that? That's what you need to be telling your mind. So writing is often psychologically painful, but procrastinating is just not going to help you. So think about your habits. Try writing with others. That can be really powerful. And recognize that it's a journey. It's something you learn through hard work and trial and feedback. But it's not a fixed, you can do it or you can't. Everyone can learn to be a better writer. Here's one more quote. Being a good writer is 3% talent, 90% not being distracted by the internet. Very, very true. Lots more tips on our website, womeninresearch.org.au, writing strategies. So I would like to introduce our two panelists. And first up, sorry, I'm going to have to turn my head because it's too small. Oh, no, I can read. We have Lidia, who is an ARC Laureate Fellow and a distinguished professor at QUT in Queensland. And she is really coming from a science perspective, and does fantastic research around air pollution and these sorts of topics. So it's really great when we have a more science and a more humanities or social science. So our other panelist is ARC Laureate Fellow Jane McAdam, who is a Scientia Professor of Law, and does research on refugees and evacuations and all sorts of fantastic things. So as usual, it's a great pleasure to have these very high-performing, busy people joining us to share their tips. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and Lidia, you're going to kick us off. So you're going to share your slides, and then we will get underway. I haven't had a chance to read the chat, so I'm just seeing, we've got some great comments in there. Okay, Lidia, when you're ready to roll, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for inviting me, and I hope you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Perfect.
Writing is something which I love doing, and I always love doing, but I realize that not everybody likes writing, can write. And actually very few people would admit that they enjoy this. So I very much like to help and talked about this topic many times. I'm very pleased that while we didn't discuss what were we going to talk about, I decided to talk about what you said, writing is a craft. So that's it, basically a continuation, like how to do it. If you had a recipe how to do it, then it's much easier. And I'll specifically focus on a paper. Of course, you can write all kinds of things, but I'll be talking about papers. Now, before you start writing, a few points, and again, Karen, you alluded to them. The first one is exercise your brain. ChatGPT will not turn you into a scientist. I'll come back to this. But the second, what you said, Sharon, is read, read, read. If you're writing a paper, scientific writing, you cannot make it up without reading. Develop ideas and test them. And that big questions, you need to have an idea. That's extremely important. I'll come back to this. Question and check everything. What is the source of this information? And make why the most common word you use. You must be critical. So this issue of big questions or good questions, big questions, how can I ask a big question? You may ask yourself if you are a student. Well, I always like this. When I read about this years ago, about this particular person, Martha McClintock, a graduate student, suggested that pheromones are the cause of menstrual synchrony. Now, this wasn't the topic of her PhD. She just observed this. She went with this to a supervisor, and the supervisor said, well, if you think that's the case, develop a study, prove it. She did. And this was, as you can see, published in Nature and changed the way this area is ruled. So you always can ask big questions. But once you ask a question, you must have a well-defined aim and a so what factor. What does it mean, so what factor? When I was on editorial board of the journal Science of the Total Environment, we were discussing how to, on what basis to reject papers straight away. We were getting so many papers. And so the idea came like this: has the paper so what factor? It's not just we did this, we measured this, we analyzed this, so what? That so what is extremely important. So, good paper for a good peer-reviewed journal in your field, but also to communicate information. That's another topic. What's a good journal? And that could be a separate conversation. When to start paper, you may ask, what is the slide doing here? Because the first thing is to develop the structure of the paper. I cannot sit down and start writing. I have to have the structure in my mind. And I develop this structure not looking at the computer or a piece of paper, either walking, looking in the nature. That's how and only when I have this structure of the paper, then I can start populating the structure. So in the paper, you have the abstracts. This is what the editor sees first, and based on this, the paper will be rejected straight away or sent for review. So in the abstract, it's like a recipe here. What is the research problem and why it is important, the aim of the study, how it was addressed, results, so what factor. All this within the word limit. Introduction, short and to the point. Leave the rest for the discussion. You cannot, it's no point having everything in the introduction. Should end up the introduction with a very clear, clearly explained aim, the aim of the study. Methods, be exhaustive. All what you have done, how you have done it, why you have done it this way, all this needs to be included. Any detail you may think it's not important, everything is important. Results. Well, sometimes there's discussion. That section should be results and discussion or separate sections. It depends, but usually it's easier to write separately results section and discussion section separately. There's also an issue what to include in the body of the paper and what in the supplementary. It's usually you have too much stuff and how to fit it. So it's best to have a good supplementary which explains everything rather than trying to be kind of halfway in the body. Extremely important during when you are writing, and particularly when you come to the conclusions, is relating the aims and conclusions. So These were my aims and how the outcomes address the aims. Very often this is forgotten. You start writing, then you come to something, but how it is related to what I said I aim to. References relevant to the paper, your papers or your team references, of course, if they are relevant, but only a few relevant and not the whole list of your references. And as recent as possible. If you are basing this on a reference 20 years old, means that you probably haven't done much reading recently. Be your own reviewer. In other words, be critical. So write, then leave it for a day or two, read it again, and critically assess it. This is extremely important. Be honest. I like this quote from President Thomas Jefferson. Honesty is the first chapter of the Book of Wisdom. Explain in detail all the problems and limitations, highlight them. Don't hide. Don't hide because reviewers will find them. And plagiarism can kill your career, usually does, and it's very easy to detect. Once you're honest, most things can be forgotten, most things can be accepted, but be honest. Be inclusive, think who to invite to join and help with the paper. It's much better if you have experts helping you rather than you trying to redevelop the wheel, which you won't do very well. So invite people to join, give credit to all those who helped as co-authors or in the acknowledgement. And finally, AI, our friend or enemy, which is a very sort of hot and favorite topic right now. There's no doubt that AI is here to stay. But you must be smarter than AI, which means, in other words, you are in control rather than AI controlling you. So far, I must say, reading and writing hundreds of papers, I haven't seen a good application of AI in writing. I know experts in AI who know exactly how to use AI as a tool. But all those what I've seen, it was a very primitive using of AI, which I can detect immediately by the style of writing, by not fitting really, not saying much. There's been papers written about this. So why would you do it? Why would you think that AI would do a better job for you? You will come up with something much better, and you are doing novel research. AI is trained on the existing research. So use AI for spelling check, for things like this, maybe looking for references, but you are to write if it is good and novel. And also one thing, if you want to be physically fit, you have to exercise. You cannot take a pill or something. If you want your brain to work, you have to exercise your brain. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lydia. I think that was a great point to end on. And we might come back to that a little bit later in questions. And if people have different views, feel free to share them. But thank you so much, Lydia. Writing is a craft. And in my view also, there is no substitute for doing it as the way to learn. And reading, of course, helps as well. So I'm delighted now to introduce Jane. And Jane, you're going to share some of your thoughts, your tips for getting going with writing as well. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thanks for having me back. And hello to everybody. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Darramurrugal people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and of course extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are joining us today. So I thought I would address a cluster of questions that had come through prior to the webinar about how do we develop a writing habit. And Sharon very helpfully has already spoken on this. And so some of what I'm going to say will reinforce her message too. And I think that can be helpful when you're having a consistent message coming across. So I had the benefit many years ago now of attending a seminar that was run by an organisation called Think Well, and it was on turbocharging your writing. They have a book by the same name, which you can, I'm not advertising for them, but they have it on their website. And probably the core message that came through to me was this idea that you should try and write for what they call 2 golden hours a day. Now, sometimes you might not have 2 golden hours. It might be the 1 Starbucks hour that Sharon talked about. But essentially, it is building a writing habit so that you have kind of short snaps of writing rather than thinking, oh, I'll have to wait for a month till I get that whole day. So for me, those 2 golden hours are in the morning. And, again, it might be late evening for you, but figuring out, and that might be through trial and error, what's the best time of day for me is important. And then it's about blocking out those hours in your calendar so no one else can schedule meetings for you, turning off your email, not checking your phone, and realizing this is time for writing. It's not about reference checking. It's not about looking up new things you need to read, but it's really about getting ideas on paper. They might be half-formed ideas. Again, it's not what's the most beautiful prose you can write. It's getting the ideas down. And I think leaving off at the end with a realistic sense of, well, what do I have to do the next time I come back to this can also be helpful. Your future self will thank you for saying, now you're going to write this section on whatever, rather than going, oh, yeah, what was I doing when I was looking at this yesterday? I think you want your writing time to be something you look forward to and that makes you feel like you've actually accomplished something. So if I do get my 2 hours in the morning, then, and particularly if they're early, then often that makes me feel like I've accomplished something before other people might even be at their desks. Now, that's maybe not the best way to frame it, but often it means, oh, I don't feel like I've missed out on all this other stuff that's happening that maybe is needing my attention because I'm doing this early. Even if it's not, it's blocking out that time and knowing, this is just for me. The other thing too is that if you have the luxury of being able to block other times in your calendar for, this is when I'm going to do this or that, again, it stops other people from filling up your time. And I think the other benefit is that you start to appreciate how much you can actually get done. Often I think because we can be kind of have our attention on writing and something else, we think it takes longer than it actually does. Whereas if you're not distracted and you can maintain your focus, you can actually do heaps. And I realized this a lot during COVID when I was trying to juggle home life with work life, and I was keeping a time log, and it was really interesting to see how I spent my time. The other thing is that sometimes I've tried to use this 2 hour, or you can do 1 hour, whatever it is, process to work on different things, like 2 different articles at the same time. And I found that's been very useful for creativity and productivity, because each time I come to something knowing it's for a particular period, I'm coming to it fresh. I'm not spending the whole day on it and getting tired. And I was finding that it was a very useful way, or have found it's been a very useful way to work. That said, it's important to kind of recognize, and this is again going back to that seminar I talked about, if you've got a lot of planes in the air, articles, whatever, which ones can you bring into land? And again, that can also be help you to declutter your mind when you've got a lot of things going on. So it might be that you're in the middle of something and you get this brand new, brilliant idea for an article. By all means, write down your brilliant ideas before you forget them. But if you can spend, another few days just bringing this other article to fruition, it would make sense to do that, particularly if you're working with other people. And I've always got in my mind, okay, if I do this bit now, does that then assist a co-author to get on with it, rather than me being a blockage in other people's productivity as well. The other thing, though, is that sometimes you might wake up, there's something, this is for me as a lawyer engaged in, refugee law and policy, there might be something in the paper that I think, okay, I have to write something, in the media op-ed blog on this now because it's time critical. So if you're struck with that and you're inspired to do it, then go for it. I wouldn't want the 2 hours to be something that's preventing you from doing something that's meaningful. It's when you start writing other stuff as a procrastination strategy that it can sometimes be a problem. The other thing with the shorter pieces is they can actually often both feed off the longer term work you're doing, but also inspire you for that longer term work. So in the last week or so with some of my postdocs, we wrote a couple of blogs about repatriation from Iran and Israel, which is part of our longer term work on evacuations. And having those very concrete contexts to think about also enabled us to progress some of our ideas for the longer term work. So it can have that dual benefit. The other thing that I was advised to do from an early career stage as well was to try and get 3 bites of the cherry. So by that, if you are writing a conference paper, is that something you will turn into or can turn into an article and in turn maybe write a blog about? Or if you've done the article, can you present aspects of that somewhere and maybe turn some of it into a parliamentary submission? So thinking of different ways you can rework some of your research to disseminate it to different audiences, I think can be very useful as well. There were some questions too prior to the webinar today about working with co-authors, and I've had a range of different experiences here. I think that can also be a helpful way to feel, or not just to feel, but to be productive if you're working with people who spur you on and can inspire you, but equally you can say, I've had enough of this now, over to you for your bit. Then they come back and you're kind of feeding off each other in terms of the ideas. But of course, there can also be those situations where the co-authorship just isn't working as well as you might hope, and it can be really challenging and time consuming. So it's about, understanding who you're working with, to what end you're trying to collaborate, and perhaps working on a short piece first to kind of check, is this going to work if we're taking on a longer term project. The other thing I would say is how important it is to take breaks to stay refreshed and focused. So going out into the environment, going for a walk, going swimming, your brain will, and sleeping too, your brain will process information differently. And the number of colleagues who've said to me, the best and brightest ideas I had weren't in front of my computer. It was when I went wandering, in the bush, and I suddenly went, oh, actually what I'm trying to do is this. So, try and see those things not as taking away from your work, but actually enhancing your work. Okay, and then probably the last thing I have time to say is just about framing your expectations. So I think very often how we're feeling about our work is what we've told ourselves we're going to do. And if, as Sharon said, you set an achievable goal, I'm going to write 200 words, I'm going to write the conclusion to this section, then when you actually accomplish that, you feel great about it, rather than having sat down and thought, oh, I've just got to write, and then thinking, oh, I've only done 200 words. So much of this is about psychology of what we think we're going to do and how we achieve it. And it can really set you up for a great day if you feel you've faced if you're working in the morning, if you've done a good job with your writing. So I think, setting those goals will not only enable you to get through the work, which of course can be a classic procrastination technique. If you think, oh, I've got 3 years to write this book, then how do you chunk it down? So it's about chunking down the task, making it manageable, and then feeling like you've achieved your goal because you've actually written the 200 words. And if obviously these small webinars are fantastic, but there's also a podcast that I found interesting to listen to called The Academic Imperfectionist, which touches on lots of the issues that the Small Wins webinar series does too. So that might be something you want to take a look at or listen to when you're off for a walk. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jane. I love calling that hour or 2 hours the golden time. I love that. And the 3 bites of a cherry, I think that's a really good piece of advice. And I will often say that around grants. You had a few ideas that whenever you're writing a grant, it should also be, you should have in mind that it's the beginning of a theory paper, or it's something more, because otherwise we just waste so much time writing grants, right? So I've just also been observing some fantastic chat happening. And I hope, Celine, you don't mind, but you're talking about your strategies for motivating around your self-inflicted rewards and punishments. And, I think that's sort of what I was talking about that contingency. You put in place some contingencies. So thank you for sharing and some of the other fantastic tips. Looks like there might be some interest in some of you guys coming together and creating some online writing groups, which can work. And so if you can't figure out a way, it looks like you've shared some emails, but if you can't figure out a way to do that, feel free to let Eleanor know who you write to register, and then we can connect you all and you can self-organise thereafter. But I'm going to turn now to Lucinda, who is going to share any tips that you shared at the beginning, but also ask some questions. Over to you, Lucinda.
Thanks, Sharon, and thank you all for all of your great tips and advice. I've definitely learned some stuff that I'm going to take and implement myself. I thought first that I would share, as Sharon said, some of the tips that everyone's shared, and then we've got a few questions that we can ask of you all. So I had a quick skim through the tips and kind of themed them into little bundles. It's not exhausting, but I'm sure we'll send out the list of things that everyone sent. But some of the things that the audience suggested, setting timers and chunking things down into smaller pieces, whether that's shorter time periods or shorter word numbers, for example. So breaking it down into as short as 15, 20-minute writing blocks and then giving yourself a little break. I know for my PhD, I was down to like 15-minute writing blocks. I was so over it by the end, but that got me through the PhD. A lot of people talked about mind mapping and planning using dot points before starting writing so that you're not just staring at a blank page. We've talked a bit about shut up and write sessions, and I think people are still organizing your own shut up and write sessions in the chat. But writing retreats, working with colleagues, having regular social meetups to write seems to be really key for a lot of people. Dot points. I saw some that I really liked around treating your writing like joining a conversation. So having it in your mind that you are really writing to someone who cares about your work and wants to know what you have to say, which I thought was a nice way to frame the idea of writing. Some questions that we had. I wondered if Sharon and Jane, if you had any other ideas around AI and the use of AI to complement Lydia's thoughts on ChatGPT.
I guess I just kick off, and I did, to be fair, ask Lucinda to ask this question because I have been observing more and more people using ChatGPT to write papers, and the first thing is I can tell, and it's not a particularly positive feeling. And I think that if reviewers are reading articles and they're of my generation and they're seeing things that they think are written by ChatGPT, they will have a similar reaction potentially to me. And look, we all need to just recognize that you need to use the tools available, but I think it's about perhaps how you use ChatGPT. But I think using it to craft those final drafts is probably not a good idea, because that's where the flowery language or the overblown statements and stuff come in. But you might be able to use it in other ways, like summarizing large chunks. And maybe guys who are online, you've got some ideas of how you can use ChatGPT. So I wouldn't say it shouldn't be used at all. I think it just needs to be used very judiciously. And of course, there'll be no time at all where, just like plagiarism detectors, there will be Gen AI detectors, and that might be fine. It might be that it's fine that you use it. You've just got to disclose, but we don't know yet what the rules are going to be. But I would just say be very, very careful, because I think that, and I also think it probably detracts from the quality, because you're not really learning the skill. It is a skill of writing. But I'll give an example just quickly of how I've used it, but I could see some dependence creeping in. I'm writing this book. It's way too long. It's a practical book. I started chucking in bits into ChatGPT and saying, shorten it by 30%, put it in active voice, make it interesting. And it's created this beautiful stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. And I just kept doing it. And first of all, then I realized that I'm giving all my IP to ChatGPT, number one. Second of all, I was becoming sort of dependent. And I was thinking, and then I was reading back over what I'd written, and you could tell. So I have stopped, but I found it really useful for giving me ideas on how to shorten things. So that's what I mean by using it judiciously. I think it was really good to see, yeah, because there's no way I can shorten this. And then yes, you can actually. And so it was a good learning thing, but I did feel a bit of dependence creeping in, so I've really pulled back a bit. So, but Jane, what about you? What do you think?
Look, I echo what you've said, really. And I think, the danger of using it to write pieces is, if somebody as a reviewer thinks they've detected it, then they're going to, or I would anyway, think, hang on, did this person actually write any of this? Is the whole thing sort of plagiarized or written by somebody else? And I just think it sets up the reviewer in assuming it's not you kind of, perspective. The other thing is, I think, and I've seen a few people saying this in the chat, it can be useful to test out ideas. I haven't done this, but I've had colleagues say, it's a way I will ask it questions and ask it to critically evaluate what I'm doing. Well, sometimes I might have fed in something, and again, like you, Sharon, I went, actually, this is feeding my ideas into ChatGPT, but still to say, can you summarize this? And so sometimes we'll do bullet points, and I've never picked them up and used them, but it can make me think, oh, right, is that what I was doing? But also it can be incredibly unreliable. And so for some of the new research that I've done, it's given, it's sort of seeing what it would say about certain concepts, and it got them completely back to front. So if you know what you're doing, you will recognize that. But if you don't, you could end up in big trouble for lots of different reasons.
Yeah, thank you. Another question that we had was around grant applications and how you balance grant applications with other types of writing. Do you approach it any differently to another type of manuscript? Any thoughts on grants? Perhaps, Lidia, we can start with you.
Well, it's a bit different type of writing than writing a paper, because in paper you've done something, you've achieved something. Here you are to achieve something. I was for a number of years on ARC, College of Experts, which means that I had to review grant applications, and the process is such that you get, let's say, 150 applications, and you have to review them in a week while doing all kinds of other things. Which means that, as I was told before by colleagues who did it, that I will have take 15 minutes to review one grant application. So you spend all those months and months writing a grant application. The application, if you printed it, would be a book, really, with everything. And then the ARC carriage, that's how it's called, spends 15 minutes on this application. So what is the most important? The most important here is that it's a very clear idea presented in such a way that a non-expert in the field can say, wow, I understand this is important, but also showing there's a depth that's not only some kind of maybe something, but as a depth. So really is that that 30 seconds that the carriage will decide. And then the ranking of this carriage 1 and 2 actually then carries in what happens with the applications. So this is very important. And then clarity through the whole text, clarity such that I was taught this, but it works very well, that you should be able to read the application by going through highlighted bits. Don't have a sort of whole page of text, because how to read something like this. So have bits highlighted, and if you can read by this, that's another piece. So as clear as possible, spoon feeding to the ARC carriage or any other grant assessing bodies, and to colleagues who can say, oh yeah, they are doing this, they are doing this.
Yeah, I like that, spoon feeding it. Jane, anything to add to that?
No, I think that was absolutely excellent in terms of summarizing what you need to do. And I suppose the only thing I would add is obviously you're trying to appeal there to, the experts in your field, but also experts people who aren't expert in your field, but obviously in academia. And so practicing writing in a clear, simple style through, blogs and media pieces can be helpful there to try and straddle both.
And Sharon, any other thoughts?
Well, just to reiterate what I said earlier, statistically, you're not likely to get the grant, right? So always be thinking, using it as a way. It's got a deadline, which is good because our other writing deadlines don't often exist. So it's got a deadline. Use it as a way to push your thinking forward, to plan studies that you really do want to do. So I would just always have that. We talked about there's a dual audience. There's the panelists, the ARC, and there's the experts in your field. But if you can also layer in a dual purpose that you're trying to get a grant, but you're also trying to progress your thinking. That would be my suggestion.
Beautiful. Did you want to wrap us up, Sharon?
I think we might need to. So as usual, we all never seem to have enough time. But look, thank you so much. And there's enormous amount of fabulous chat and suggestions on the meeting chat, which you can access anytime, right? Because once you've joined in, you can access. And thank you for coming along. We did have it, I saw at one point, well over 300 people online. So none of this would work without an audience. So thank you for coming along. Tell your peers and colleagues about the session. Most of all, thank you to the three people that I can see on my screen, Lucinda, Jane, and Lydia. Fantastic tips and advice. And there are people behind the scenes as well, Isabel and Eleanor. Thank you to those guys. And look forward to seeing you all again soon. I can't remember what we've got scheduled or if we've got anything, but it will be in 6 weeks or so. And thank you again, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.